of the self-reported intakes, what was interesting was that the total fruit and vegetable intake was about 2.4 cups per day. And the fruit and vegetable screener actually estimated intakes about 1 cup higher than the DSQ. One of the explanations we came up with was that the screener is more detailed. It includes actual individual items of specific vegetables. And so that may have contributed to maybe overestimation or higher reports of fruit and vegetable intake. The vegetable intake was actually almost identical. It was about 1.3 cups of vegetables per day. And again, that excluded French fries. And fruit intake was higher from the fruit and vegetable screener. And both of these fruit subscales included 100% fruit juice. So I just want to point it out as we talk about the results. Now, in terms of some of the skin carotenoid levels, the mean value for the entire sample was 261. So when I know Jared reported the mean values for his samples, so this was kind of similar to what we have seen in previous studies. The range of scores was 74 to 565. And as a reminder, the max score is 800 for this device. I'm curious to hear from others what the highest score was across their studies if they're using the Veggie meter. But when we look at some associations with selected characteristics, we saw positive correlations with education and income, which we expected. They were pretty weak associations, but they were significant. But surprisingly, actually, we did not see differences in the Veggie meter scores by food security status or by race and ethnicity. So that's interesting finding that we detected in our sample. Now, we did see differences in the Veggie meter scores by pre-pregnancy weight status. Obese women had the lowest Veggie meter scores compared to the other weight status categories, again, looking at pre-pregnancy weight status. And there was no difference in the Veggie meter scores between women who were at a healthy weight versus overweight prior to pregnancy. We also look at smoking because we know smoking influences carotenoid levels. And so we saw negative correlation, which was expected. And going back to food environment here, this was interesting. We actually saw weak but positive association between the Veggie meter scores and the perceived availability of healthy foods in the neighborhood. We did not see the association when we looked at self-reported fruit and vegetable intake. So there's definitely some discrepancies between the Veggie meter, the more objective, and self-reported measures of fruits and vegetables. Now, looking at associations between the Veggie meter scores and self-reported intakes, this is from the DSQ. So the only correlation that was significant we saw between the vegetable intake, self-reported, and the Veggie meter scores. And we saw a very similar trend with the fruit and vegetable screener. It was a little stronger, but still a weak association with the self-reported vegetable intakes. So no correlation between Veggie meter scores and fruit, self-reported fruit intakes. And again, even the vegetable intake that was reported from self-report was just weakly associated with the Veggie meter scores. So we couldn't help it, of course. So we wanted to look at these associations within our three racial and ethnic groups that were represented in the sample. And that's when we realized that these associations actually look different between non-Hispanic white and other participants. So when we look at the non-Hispanic white participants, which was the largest group in our subsample or in our sample, we saw moderate positive correlation between the Veggie meter scores and total fruit and vegetable intake. The vegetable intake became much stronger in the subsample. It was actually moderately correlated with the skin carotenoid levels. And fruit intake, self-reported fruit intake, became weakly associated with skin carotenoids. So we realized that this was really driven by the non-white, non-Hispanic white participants. Now, similar results for the fruit and vegetable screener, as you can see. So in this case, we did not see correlations with fruit intake, but the total fruits and vegetable intake and the vegetable intake were moderately correlated. And that was actually the highest correlation we saw, was at 0.55 between the Veggie meter scores and the vegetable intake from the fruit and vegetable screener. When we look at the other two racial ethnic groups, among biracial, multiracial, and other participants, there were actually no associations with any of the self-reported fruit and vegetable intake subscales and the Veggie meter scores. But among Black and African American participants, we had 55 of them in our sample. The total intake of fruits and vegetables and vegetable consumption were not significant still, but interestingly, we detected a negative correlation between the fruit intake from the DSQ and the Veggie meter score. And there was a marginal association between the fruit intake from the screener and the Veggie meter score. So that was interesting to see, and definitely want to hear your thoughts on this finding. So when we summarize, the values of the skin carotenoids was comparable to other studies that we have found. There are studies that looked at participants in WIC who had very similar Veggie meter scores in the 260, 270 range of scores. We did find differences in self-reported intakes of fruits and vegetables in our sample, but again, we did not detect any differences by race, ethnicity, or food security in our sample when we look at the Veggie meter scores. And again, it is more objective measure of intake, so that was interesting. Overall, we can say that fruit and vegetable consumption was relatively low in our sample. We don't have any cutoff points for Veggie meter scores, but we do know that even the self-reported intakes were below the recommendation. When you look at pregnant women recommendations for pregnant women, it's about 2 cups of fruit and 3 cups of vegetables, and they were definitely below the recommendation in our sample. But it's pretty clear that fruit and vegetable intake is important for maternal and infant outcomes. And so we would like to see more effective interventions specifically for this population, and potentially using Veggie meter as an intervention tool. Our moms in the iGrow study really enjoyed the measurements. They were very curious. They were excited. They wanted to know what the number means. You know, some of them were wondering, is my score going to increase soon? You know, so that could be really a motivating factor for some of them. And I know the interventions for pregnant moms and new moms are really scarce. So from some of my previous research, we learned that a lot of moms feel kind of left out, that you know, there's a lot of attention on the babies and on the children, but they would love to have more help with healthy eating, and even getting back to pre-pregnancy weight, healthy weight would be appreciated. So in terms of future research, a lot of questions, a lot of stuff we want to do. Based on our results, you know, just looking at the skin carotenoid levels, that the fact that they were only associated with vegetable intake in our sample and clearly driven by the correlations in the non-white Hispanic, non-Hispanic white sample was interesting. We know there were similar findings in a study by Stephanie Gilcott-Pitts that found similar results, that there were no associations between self-reported intakes and Veggie meter scores among African American and Black participants. But I think more research needs to be done. There are several ideas, you know, why we found what we found. The screeners are obviously just screeners. They're very brief. They might not be capturing the actual carotenoid intake. There might be methodological issues as well. Veggie meter captures intake over the past 3 months. These screeners really capture just the past month. So that could be an explanation of the discrepancy. But there also could be some biological differences in carotenoid metabolism, transport and storage. And really, to be honest, we don't know much about this from samples of pregnant women. So, and even looking at adiposity levels or pre-pregnancy weight status and how that might be affecting carotenoid levels in pregnant moms, that could be something to really look at in the future. So we believe that a validation of the Veggie meter is needed still in more studies in racial and ethnically diverse samples. And specifically, we hope to do more work with pregnant moms. We did collect blood samples in the iGrow study for other reasons. My hope is that we will find funds and resources to actually do a validation study with serum or plasma carotenoids. That is to be determined, but I'm working on it, so we'll see. And I would love to examine interactions between race and ethnicity and food insecurity and weight status on the Veggie meter scores in our full sample from iGrow participants. So again, we will have data from 299 participants. So that is my next step in my research efforts. So I would like to thank the iGrow research team that's involved in the study, everyone involved on the team, but also, of course, our participants, because that is a big study and it takes a lot. Some of the visits are 2.5 hours long. So we're really appreciative. Again, thank you to Jared for letting us use the Veggie meter, and I look forward to our future analyses looking at the geocoding and GIS in terms of our participants' intake. And also thanks to my doctorate student, Molly, who is here today with us, and she has been working closely with the Veggie meter data and the self-reported intakes, and she's experiencing all kinds of fun looking at self-reported measures of fruits and vegetable intake. And I look forward to us working together on this in the upcoming months. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lenka, for that really interesting presentation. I'd love to open the floor up for some questions. So I do see some in the chat if you'd like me to start there. Mm-hmm. Oh, but I see Susan Sisson has a question. Please go ahead, Susan.
Hi, thank you so much. This was a really great presentation, and I'm sorry I was a little bit late. So I'm Susan Sisson at the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center. So my question for you is, you mentioned that the women were really interested in the scores and what they meant. And I'm just really curious what you said to them. You know, how do you discuss and address what this means without tampering with your intervention, of course? And then, you know, so I'm just really curious as to what you said from a very practical perspective. So thank you for your time and your work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we try to minimize, this is an observational study. We try to minimize, you know, any kind of impact on our participants. So we try to say as little as possible. We try to explain, you know, why we're doing it and what it's going to be like. And so always be a step ahead of them. But we try to avoid any kind of, you know, like, well, this is a great score, or this is really low, or, you know, so we just explain what it does, but we're trying to stay away from any kind of influence on their intake. And I was just presenting some of our research recently, and one of the people who was there, he started suggesting like, oh, you should really have a lactation consultant, you know, in your study. And I'm like, no, that is coming in a few years, right? When we're ready for intervention, we're gonna do all that. So but yeah, thank you for the question. I think they would really be motivated if it was an intervention tool in another study. I think it would be really encouraging them to change their eating habits and you know, see if the score goes up. Of course, it could also be demotivating if the score didn't change, but we were just happy that it was very feasible and easy to use, and you know, it took a few seconds and we were done, and we didn't have to deal, well, we still collected the self-reported, but it was very helpful to have that done in our study.
And I'll just add, Stephanie Dilcutt-Pitt shared, the first link she shared in the chat was to a paper that looked at the Veggie meter as an educational tool. It looks like it's in young students. I haven't dug deep enough yet to look at the details of the study, but it seems like they had some positive outcomes on actually using that as an educational tool. So great question, Susan, because it could, you know, influence that intervention.